My name's Jill Rowe, and in this episode of the Different Podcast, I chat with Steve Chalke about 3 more things we wish we could tell our younger selves. From winning looking like you're losing to close both eyes and see with the other one. This episode was so much fun to make. We hope and pray that amongst our conversation, you are able to find a little bit of treasure that will help you. Steve, here we are. Another episode of the Different Podcast with Steve Chalke and Jill Rowe.
Hallelujah. How wonderful is that?
Isn't it great? And
because last time we started, you said I was a bit down. Do you remember? I can't remember what I said. I said, hello, or something like that. So I tried to get...
You didn't sound like you were thrilled.
Well, hallelujah, how wonderful it is to be here. You see,
he's gone completely the other way now.
Yeah, I've gone the other way.
Pumped it up. Steve, today we're going to... Do you remember the other week we did an episode all about things that we tell our younger selves?
Oh, yes, I do remember
that was part 1.
Because I said my first thing would be always say yes, and then you told me off. I said, that's not good advice.
I think it was just a different way of looking at it. But that was part 1, and we realised that there were probably some more things that we'd probably say to our younger selves. So we're into part 2 this week. And maybe there might be another part, who knows? But it's quite fun. So... do you want to kick us off? What's something that you would say to yourself, to younger you?
There are so many things, but one of them is this. I've learned that you win looking like you're losing.
Yes, like that. Say more.
Well, I think that life's pathway is hard, and if you're focused on what you believe your life is for and what you're here to contribute, you have this burning desire to get there, and it's incredible the number of barriers that get in your way, and often it's people that get in your way. It's people who you think you can trust, but then they let you down. It's people that you think are going to deliver, but then they don't deliver. It's sometimes things that you're promised, but then those don't come off, and it's so easy to give up, isn't it? Or it's so easy to join in and become one of those people who's looser with their words than they are with their delivery behind all of that. And that's a huge struggle. It's a struggle. And even as I talk about it now, after all these years, that's the advice I'd give to my young self, because that was my experience of life, all the setbacks that you face as you try to make your way forward. But even today, this very day, do you know, I've lived that experience again, whereas I was talking to a friend of mine who's been involved in a big project with me, and we've been incredibly let down by people who said that they were in. They didn't need to say they were in. They could have said, we're not for this. But for many months, they've told us that they will be in this with us. And we've gone out on a limb to try and make things work. And then we just heard that actually they've changed their mind, even though they'd signed up to help us. And so on the way here, just talking to my friend on the phone, we were just kind of commiserating with one another. Yeah. But that's why I say it, reminding ourselves that you do win looking like you're losing.
And there's something in there, Steve, as well, isn't there, about, in a world where people want to win. And I mean win by being first and by being top there's something about what you're saying where you win looking like you're losing, but the way you win is service and knowing that things aren't always going to work, and yet you keep pursuing the goal.
Yeah. It's back to me. It's back for me to these ethics or values that I've tried to live by all my life. Jesus said, go the extra mile. Go the extra mile. Push again. Take the slap. Don't return it. Take the blow. Don't return it. Give yourself. And the incredible thing, I think, is that can sound like, oh, you're just becoming a doormat for people to trample over. But the truth is, I've found that though sometimes you feel you have been that, the reality is that if you stick with what you know that you should be about, it's incredible how it comes about if you can hang on. I often say to myself, let alone other people, I say the problem with vision, a sense of direction and what you should be about, is it's almost like an incurable disease. There's nothing you can do about it. You will live caught in the tension between what you're aiming at, what you aspire to, what you know.
The now and not yet.
Exactly. That's a great way of putting it. But you do win. You do get there. Famously, to turn all that theory into a practice, into a practicality. At the beginning of setting up Oasis, there were lots of things that I was involved in. But what I wanted to do was set up a house for supported living for young people. And that was the first kind of practical big project. I mean, we did lots of projects before that, but the practical, you can still go see that house today, as part of Oasis. But the interesting thing is that it's in Southwark, the borough of Southwark in London, and it's in Peckham. And I went to see the head of housing. I must have been 29, I think. And I went to see the head of housing about how we were going to set up this supported housing unit in Southwark, in Peckham. And he sat there and he looked at me and he said, "Never. You're not going to do that." And I said, "Why not?" He said, "Because we don't want your type." He said this to me. "We don't want your type working around here." And I said, "Why not?" He said, "Well, you're a Christian. We don't want your type. We're not having your type working here. And what's more, you're the worst type of Christian." And I thought, "Well, what's the worst type?" He said, "You're a reverend," which I was. He said, "We just don't want you. You'd over my dead body." I'd gone to him for help because I knew that there were so many kids struggling, and sofa surfing and really vulnerable. Anyway, I don't know what happened to him, but it was a long slog, about 3 years, because I had no money, no contacts. I was asking him for contacts, really. But finally, we got this old house with no roof and no stairs, although it had 2 floors. It just had no way of getting from the ground floor to the other one when we bought it. It's amazing what you can buy if you go for a house with no roof and no stairs.
It was a doer-upper.
Yeah, it was a development opportunity. And we finally got hold of this house. And, my wife, Cornelia, said, we should call this house Oasis because we're going to create Oasis for young people here who've never had Oasis. So that's how Oasis came about. And the whole thing got open. And you win looking like you're losing. And the irony of the whole thing is, I don't know what happened to that good man. Do you know, I don't know what happened to him. And I hope that it wasn't over his dead body. I really hope it wasn't. I hope he celebrated it. But about 30 years later, we still run this thing, but about 30 years later, Southwark Council, because we've been offering this quality care all the way through these 3 decades or more, Southwark Council gave us the contract to manage all of the housing for 16 pluses. So we now, across the whole borough, manage their housing. When originally those 35 years ago, whatever it was, told us to shove off. You win looking like you're losing.
So connected with what you said, Steve, is this quote by Rumi, which I think if young Jill could hear this and understand it, I think it's just really great advice, which is close both eyes, see with the other one, which is right bizarre, isn't it? But it's this idea that actually there's call it the third eye, I don't know, but it's like that gut instinct, the intuition that has the ability to go, I know there's all of this, but what if I saw it differently? What if I was able to engage with this thing beyond what is the obvious? So with that, like what you've just been talking about, what if this situation that looks awful, actually what's the thing I can learn? If I look at it just a bit differently, how might that be transformed for me?
And how's that worked out for you? Why have you reached the place where you think, that's it?
I think life is complex. Like there's nothing that's ever a breeze. And I've come to see that as I've more in latter years, as I've practiced that, hang on a minute, just take a moment and think, what is there an invitation in this? If I look at it differently, what's the invitation? It frees you of the stress of the complexity. So you know it's still complex. You know that it's still going to be a challenge, but it's not a stressor. And it like brings joy back into the, what could it makes you curious.
Yeah.
And for me, just practicing that, like literally pausing and practicing taking a breath. I scrunch my eyes sometimes and I'm just like, okay, just look at it differently. What could it be? I think if I could have learnt that a bit sooner, that would have been great. Yeah, that would be one for me.
Well, that, incredibly, because we've not prepared this, it plays into the thing I've written down on my paper
What have you got there,
with my
Steve?
green pen. It says, reflect and respond.
There you go.
Don't react and regret. And I regret very much that I didn't understand that early enough.
Yeah.
Reflect and respond. Don't react and regret. Don't leap in there with both feet. Take time. You don't have to, I've learned, respond to that email that really makes you mad and wham it out the park right now. If you must write it, and it's best not to very often, but if you must write it, write a draft and put it in the draft box and then leave it till the morning or a couple of days and then come back to it. Or if it's appropriate, show it to someone else. You know, instead of picking up the phone and tearing into something, sit back and reflect. What's the best way of doing this? As you say, exactly as you say. Is there another route forward? Is there another way of seeing this? This situation looks like it's all collapsing and falling apart. Where's the opportunity in it? Is there an opportunity in it? If I respond in this way, if I react in this way, what do I achieve except to lose things? If I reflect and respond instead of reacting, then I won't regret and I won't want to undo. And it comes back to that thing I think I said, the other week, my wife always says, the more stressed I am, the more stupidly I behave. The more stupid the things I say, the more bizarre my reactions and responses are. The calmer I am, the more thoughtful they are. So that's back to reflect on it, even if it's bad, and respond out of that instead of rushing into everything and then regretting it afterwards. That is, and I'd say that works for me personally when I actually achieve it, rather than ignore my own advice. But I'd say that it's worked through the history of the development of Oasis, where there are always really tricky things going on. Yeah. Somebody said to me, I don't know, last week or whatever, they said, so what's your, I do remember who it was now. Something terrible had happened in their professional life, if you see what I mean, some big setback, you know. And they were telling me all about it. And they said, I'm sorry to burden you, Steve. And I said, I smiled. And they said, why are you smiling? And I said, because my whole life is just filled up. It's a long succession of, if things can work out, no one comes to tell me about it. If they can work it out, they work it out. If they can't work it out, they tell their line manager. If their line manager can't work it out, they tell their line manager. And eventually, if no one can work it out, and it's all done, somebody comes and tells me about it when it's completely impossible to do anything about it. So, and again, in that situation, in that situation where sometimes my job now is to deal with government, to deal with tricky, very tricky and sensitive things, I've learned again what I wish I could tell my little young self. Don't react and then regret. Lean back, sit back, reflect, and then respond.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense.
There's definitely a thing in there, Steve, isn't there, about the reality of life is complex, and the only thing we can do about that complexity is our approach to it, our attitude. And what a gift to be able to get to a place. Yeah, it's something we all have to keep practicing, isn't it? But to get to a place where actually in the complexity you can still have peace. Do you know, that's got to be a goal, right? So I was thinking of another one for me, which is do your best to always be kind, which is easier said than done. But do your best to always be kind, because I've got this quite judgy voice that goes off in my head, which isn't always very, very kind. But actually everyone's trying to do their best, aren't they?
Yeah. Is it kind?
Yeah.
If it's not,
don't do it.
Don't do it. Don't say it.
Yeah. It's quite simple.
Don't contribute it. Yeah. Is it helpful? Is it kind?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's...
I mean, it's pretty basic, isn't it? But,
well, yeah, but it's those basic things that life is really about, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it applies at every level. You look all the way up to, leaders of industry and leaders in politics, etc., geopolitics.
Yeah.
Is it helpful? Is it kind?
If we do this,
yeah,
is it kind?
Reflect and respond.
Yeah.
Don't react to something and just regret it.
Yeah.
It's the way forward, Jill.
It's a weird thing, isn't it, Steve, that the most simple of advice is actually what we need most of the time, isn't it?
I'm very fortunate in that I've got loads of good advice from lots of people over the years, and one piece of advice I got, and I worked out for myself in the end. It was at the beginning of Oasis. Actually, I think I was the only person who worked for Oasis. In fact, it might have been before Oasis had begun. Yeah, I think it was actually when I worked for this
youth working
church. Yeah, when I was a youth worker in the church. Yes, it was then. I remember. And I remember when it was. I was driving on the way from Tunbridge to Maidstone.
There you go. You do remember
in
things.
my old beaten up Volvo car. Telling you about it, it comes back to me because you used to get Maidstone isn't far from Tunbridge, and there was a television studio there, I think Meridian TV or something like that. I can't remember what it was called. Anyway, they booked me a few times to be on the news because I was working as a youth worker and we were doing things, and they used to like some of the things. So I'd go over and do these interviews, and I suppose it was the sum total of conversations I'd had. But I was excited about going to this television studio, in Maidstone, hit the big time. And I was driving along, and was it the voices of others? Was it listening to my inner self? Was it God speaking to me as I think it was through all of that, though I say that advisedly because I know it's easy to kind of say about all sorts of things you want to do. That was God.
Yeah. Justify this action.
It's hard to come back from that, isn't it? If someone tells you God told me to do it, well, okay, what can I say?
Fair enough.
But no, I had this deep sense, and it was for me, and it was like I was so kind of excited I was going to be on this television show again, and I remember thinking to myself, or hearing for myself, actually, what you should do is you should never take any pictures of going on the telly or anything you do. Just never bother about it. I mean, this was before mobile phones, obviously, so it was easier not to have pictures of it. But, they were always taking pictures in television studios, of course. Don't keep them. Don't get them. And then I was doing this on top of my job. Do you see? And they were going to pay me for doing it. And I decided that any money I ever got from any of those things that was extra to my job, I just should hand in. I should never keep any other money. And so I adopted those two principles. And I often used to say to people when they try to give me money for something, I just used to say, oh, send it to my church because I work for them. And they said, no, you can have it. And I said, no, actually send it to them, or, send it to them and give it to them, pay it in as a check to them. And people said, so, well, why? And I'd say, because I've made this decision. I should never keep any money. And actually, I don't need my picture taken with whoever it is, you know. And people used to say, well, that's, are you trying to say this to all people? And I used to say, no, not at all. It's just me. It's just me. Because I know myself, and it's for me. It's not for anyone else.
Yeah.
You know, it's just what I need to do. And actually, that was a piece of advice. I don't think I gave it to myself. But when I was, you know, in my mid-20s, I would have been, somewhere between the age of 25 and about 28, I got that piece of advice. You could say I gave it to myself, but I really heard it from elsewhere.
Yeah.
And actually, through the rest of my life, it's been a really helpful thing. As Oasis has grown, I can say that's what I do. Yeah. You know, that's what I do. And of course, now I get the opportunity to earn all sorts of bits of money here and there. Yeah. But I don't, you know. Yeah. I don't. And people sometimes ask me, have you got a picture in your lounge of when you met this person or that person, you know? And I go, no, why not? You know, well, because I never took any pictures. I haven't got any pictures. And that's been a good discipline for me, and it's still a good discipline for me.
I think that's brilliant. But
you don't have to do it, because you're not susceptible to the same temptations as I am.
It's a different scale, obviously, but I think that, you know, if I get paid for speaking at a thing, then it's like, oh no, it's for Oasis. Make it to Oasis. Make it. So you've set out a rhythm, Steve.
I set out a rhythm just to both be poor.
And just the last one, and I'm sure I've mentioned it in a previous podcast, is just this thing about this moment that we have, like this. I think just to keep coming back to that, the gift of every moment just transforms how you approach every moment you have. I think that's good advice.
That's very good advice to finish with.